Let's talk about the most demonic, blood-sucking beast in the world today. A merciless, psychotic vampire, someone who delights in the brutal deaths of mothers, a monster who picks its teeth with the bones from the pulverized bodies of lifeless children. I'm talking about someone who is truly deserving of nothing but utter contempt from every person of conscience in the world. I have been following the career of Benjamin Netanyahu since the mid-1990s. I remember I had come back from Thailand a couple of years overseas, came back, and there's this big political star out of Israel. He rose to prominence in 1993 when he was elected as the chair of the far-right Likud party in Israel. And I've got this book here, A Place Among the Nations, Israel and the World. This was the first book of Benjamin Netanyahu that I had read, and I followed him closely. I wasn't a hater at first. He was very well-spoken, Western-educated, deep baritone, bassy voice, good speaker, excellent propagandist. And that's what this book is. It's a tome of propaganda, typical Zionist tripe, arguing Jewish victimhood, how the entire world, but especially the Arab people, all they want is just to annihilate the Jews, destroy their political state. These Zio-fascists are so good at just conveniently ignoring all of the criminality, all of the abuse that they themselves have dispersed into the world that engenders so much of this global resentment. So, cry me a river, Israel. Well, Netanyahu argues in this book that he wants peace with Palestinians. Peace is possible. And he lays out the terms for peace. And basically, those terms are this. The Palestinians will never have a state of their own because the whole land belongs to the Jews, even though they had just moved there after a hiatus of a few thousand years, but whatever. Palestinians are never going to have a land of their own. Never have a state of their own. They have to turn over their lands. They have to turn over their sovereignty to the Jews, and basically just lay down and die. And if the Palestinians don't agree to all of this, well, peace isn't possible. They don't want peace. If they don't agree to these terms, these people are really nothing more than terrorist chaff that has to be winnowed from the very lands that they have been living on for hundreds and hundreds of years. So anyway, I was big into the geopolitics of the Middle East in the mid-90s. It was really around 96 with the Oslo Accords that I really started paying attention to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Until then, it was a passing interest, just based on my interest in Bible land history and archaeology of the Holy Land, things like that. But I remember there was a lot of the Oslo Accords were televised, and Netanyahu was not the prime minister at the time. It was Yitzhak Rabin. But anyway, he goes on. That was up through around 95, 96. Netanyahu wins in 96. He is the first person to be elected by the popular vote to become prime minister. There have been several prime ministers, of course, before him, but not by popular vote. So leading up to this election, Netanyahu was actually trailing his opponent, Shimon Peres, by quite a lot. But then here we are right before the election, and there is a convenient wave of suicide bombings that hit Jerusalem, and it fills the Israeli public with this thirst for vengeance. And when it comes to choosing somebody who is willing to spill buckets of blood, people knew who they could turn to. Netanyahu had never been shy about his militant rhetoric and his racist rhetoric about the Palestinians. So they decided, all right, Shimon Peres too weak, let's turn to this guy. And I've noticed this pattern with Netanyahu. Whenever he's on the cusp of gaining power and needs to be pushed over the edge, or if he's on the cusp of losing power, for some reason, there's always this sudden burst of violence against Israeli citizens. It always seems to turn them toward Netanyahu's demagogic promises to find and destroy the enemy. So anyway, he takes power in 96, but he loses in 1999. The people are like, well, okay, this guy's a little too much. But he didn't disappear completely from politics. He went into some private ventures, but he stayed active as a figure because he intended to return. So he spends his time pressing U.S. politicians for war against Israel and Israel's geopolitical foes in the region. And you may remember, well, maybe you won't remember, but you can find it on YouTube, old video clips of Netanyahu in Congress telling them, this is after 9/11, you've got to go to war. You've got to go to war with Iraq. And he pressed, like, oh yeah, Saddam Hussein, he's on the verge of getting nuclear weapons. He's going to kill all of you Americans. You've got to do this. And so he's pressing us there. He had pressed us to go into Afghanistan. Why? Because the USA could go in, the military would set up bases inside of Afghanistan from which they could launch a later invasion into neighboring Iran. And he was fully backing the idea of toppling a whole string of countries in the Middle East. And that's exactly what the establishment neocons in the Bush administration already wanted to do. Even before the 9/11 attacks happened, they were already planning this. Project for a New American Century. All of these neocons from the earlier Bush administration had returned to power under W, and they just needed the excuse. Well, anyway, skip forward a little bit of time. Netanyahu gets elected again as prime minister. This is 2009. 2009, and he stays in power all the way until June of 2021. And he gets voted out. But he's only out of power for about a year and a half, and he claws his way back. But in some countries, including Israel, to be the prime minister, what you have to do is you have to gain a majority. You have to have a coalition government. You have to have enough people, whether it's from your own party or a group of parties, to where you have a majority, and the people in Congress, in the Israeli Knesset, they didn't like Netanyahu, and they were opposing him, basically trying to keep him from taking power again in December of 2022. Now, normally the people, when they're trying to form these coalitions, they don't turn to these little fringe groups, these little fringe parties in the Knesset. I'm talking about groups of like two members that form a party, or maybe up to 6 people in a party. Because they're fringe, they're lunatics, they're nuts. It'd be like if the United States Congress had a multi-party system. You've got the Democrats, the Republicans, maybe some Libertarians and Greens, but also the KKK has a party. Right? The Black Panthers have a party. The communists of the USA have a party. Well, in the Israeli Knesset, they had some really extreme groups. And the only way that Netanyahu was going to be able to form a coalition government so that he can return to power was he had to bring these extremists in, but they knew that he was over a barrel. And so they told him, you're going to make our leaders your leaders. Your administration is going to be us. And so he's like, well, if that's what it takes to get power, that's what I'm going to do. And so you've got this pack of demons, these people who are known for their racism, for their overt Jewish supremacism, their radical support of terrorism against Palestinians, and they come to power. You've got monsters like Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir. These men are brought into Netanyahu's top leadership. And so here they are sitting. You've got Smotrich from the Religious Zionist Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir from the Jewish Power Party was the name of his party. And so this new radicalized, extremist, racist, fascist administration immediately starts implementing an unprecedented series of policies against the Palestinians. And they encouraged, in a very publicly overt way, a wave of settler violence that was so egregious that nations from all around the world, including even the U.S. government, which is Zionist, telling Israel, your attacks on the Palestinians are so outrageous, this is going to lead to an explosion of violent retaliation. Because anybody in the world subjected to as much violence as the Palestinians were being subjected to, their civilian population, with the approval and encouragement of the Israeli government, anybody would fight back. But they don't care because these leaders of Israel are nutcases. Security Minister Ben-Gvir, this guy literally praised the settlers who murdered a Palestinian child. He didn't care. He didn't care. Can you imagine some of the members of the KKK going into a black community because they want to take some land, lynching a black child, and then one of the cabinet members of the Biden administration coming out praising the KKK for killing a black kid? What do you think would happen? But not in Israel, because they're crazy. And it's not like the people are rising up against it, because the people themselves, a majority of them, are equally crazy. They're racist nutcases. They are so extreme in Israel right now. It's not that there's this huge disconnect between these extremist leaders and the average person. It certainly doesn't, you can't broad brush all of the Israeli people. Just since October 7th of last year, about 500,000 Israelis have left Israel and taken up residence in places like Berlin because they're so outraged at what's going on in their government. But still, the existing majority of the Israeli people are very extreme. So anyway, governments are warning Israel, this crap that you're doing is going to lead to retaliation. In addition to the settler violence, you've got a massive illegal annexation of huge swaths of the occupied West Bank, with plans to more than double the number of illegal settlers that are in there. And remember, this is occupied territory, illegally occupied territory since 1967. You cannot move your population into an occupied territory. It's contrary to international law. But to clear out room for the Jews to move into the West Bank, for example, what do you have to do? You've got to get rid of the Palestinians who are there, right? And the only way to get existing landowners who don't want to leave to get out of there is to do one of the two things. Either terrorize the hell out of them so that they decide that becoming a refugee is better than staying there and dealing with all of these settlers who come along with their chainsaws and their guns. Or the other option is you can just wipe them out. You can exterminate them. And that's exactly what was going on throughout the year prior to October 7th, 2023. Prior to the October 7th retaliation by Hamas. So let me tell you a little bit more, before I get back to Netanyahu, let me tell you a little bit more about this guy Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir. I mentioned a few minutes ago that Netanyahu was elected prime minister in 1996, right? The first time. Well, the year before that, the prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, he had been working with Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat at Camp David. They worked out these Oslo peace accords. And they basically came up with a framework for creating the Palestinian Authority, which was going to be, it was basically a proto-government. And within 5 years, the goal was to have a permanent Palestinian state. That was the goal. That's what Yitzhak Rabin had worked on. And this enraged people in Israel, the extremists like Ben-Gvir. And there's a video of him. He's on camera. He and a group of these pro-settler extremists are vandalizing the prime minister's car. And he says, we got his car and we're going to get him too. And just a couple weeks later, one of these extremists assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. They killed him. Why? Because he was trying to make peace with the Palestinians. And Jewish extremists in Israel are utterly opposed to any kind of peace with the Palestinians under any circumstances. God gave them the land, every inch of it, and existing population be damned. It doesn't matter that prior to the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948, Jews legally owned 5% of the entire territory. The legal landowners were the Palestinians because they had lived there for centuries on the land. It was theirs. But anyway, the guy who assumed office after Rabin was assassinated was Shimon Peres, the guy who ended up losing to Netanyahu. Well, Ben-Gvir not only represented some of these settler terrorists in court as their lawyer, but on the wall in his office was a picture of Baruch Goldstein. Goldstein was the Jew who entered a mosque in Hebron. I visited the mosque. Went into a mosque in Hebron in 1994, took a gun in, just didn't like the Arabs there, started shooting, massacred 29 people. Murderer, mass murderer, hero to Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has a picture of the guy on his wall. So yeah, this Nazi is Netanyahu's security minister. So I am not joking and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that this is the most fascist government in the entire world since the Third Reich. And what I'm trying to say is that the attacks of October 7th did not happen in some vacuum. They didn't happen out of the blue. They were a predictable response and a justifiable response to a wave of Israeli terrorism against the Palestinians that had been orchestrated by Netanyahu's fascist regime and that had been playing out, specifically this administration, since December 2022. Killing after killing after killing after killing. Mass arrest of Palestinian civilians, thrown into gulags, no charges. Kept them there. Oh, yeah, we got to shed our tears for the Jewish hostages. Okay, yes, I agree. I don't agree with taking civilian hostages. But where is the condemnation for the literally thousands of Palestinians who were snatched off the streets, including countless children who get thrown into these Israeli gulags, no charges, no right to a trial. They're there for years. They get sexually abused, they get physically abused, traumatized over and over and over. Can you imagine that here in America? Where we take people, well, let's say Trump or Biden, pick your guy, pick your crazy lunatic who doesn't like the opposition. And so they round up a bunch of people, thousands of them, don't tell them what they're being charged with, throw them into prisons, beat them, rape them, sodomize them, and refuse to release them, even when there are international groups, human rights groups, railing against this. So did Hamas take a bunch of hostages on October 7th? They did. And I hope they're released. But I don't hope 1 ounce more for their release than I hope for the release of the thousands of Palestinians that are being held hostage by the Israeli government. It's all orchestrated by Netanyahu's fascist regime. And the U.S. government, led by Joe Biden, has been both incapable and unwilling to rein in Israel's out-of-control government. Biden has presided over, if you just look at the history of the U.S. relationship with Israel, we had it pretty bad in 1967 when they tried to sink the USS Liberty and killed over 100 of our sailors, and we were like, no, Israel. But setting that incident aside, Biden has presided over the most catastrophic collapse in U.S. influence in the Middle East in modern history. He's proven himself to be utterly inept. We've seen him in the news cycle so many times now, chiding Netanyahu, repeatedly telling him to knock it off. Stop with this, stop with that, open up the humanitarian corridors, let food in, stop starving the people, stop killing so many civilians. Biden has harangued him, he's counseled him, he's advised him. In a few cases, he's even tried to order Netanyahu. Probably he has begged him to tone things down in some of these private calls. But throughout it all, Netanyahu has dished out nothing but contemptuous humiliation after humiliation on Biden. Every time Biden claimed that there was some new red line, don't cross this line, Netanyahu stuck his foot across it, gave Biden the middle finger, and that's it. At any given moment throughout this last year of genocide, any sensible president of the United States would have said, that's it, Israel, no more weapons. You have no respect for us. You won't meet us even partway. Fine, we're going to cut you off completely, cold turkey, until you come back to heel. The American people, we don't owe you anything. We certainly don't owe you the tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons that you keep using to butcher innocent men, women, and children all over the region. But I said sensible. You're not going to find a photo of Joe Biden next to the word sensible in the dictionary. He's bought and paid for by the Zionist lobby, just like that cackling vice president who's married to Doug Emhoff, a Jewish man who just a few months ago, in the midst of his praising of Israel, publicly promised to work harder than ever to fight anti-Semitism. I mean, let's forget that there's genocide going on. Let's worry about people who say mean things or say things that might be interpreted in a way that you can take offense to. Here's what he said. He said that his wife, Kamala, said, I'm not kidding. She said, Dougie, this issue has really found you. Now lean into it. So she's all in on this, the victim card and everything else. So don't look for any help from Holocaust Harris if she wins. And folks, if you think that Donald Trump is anything other than a puppet of Benjamin Netanyahu, I've got a bridge to sell you. Really, the only question I have is, which one of these two, Trump or Harris, who is going to get us into World War III faster by attacking Iran and pulling us into a new global conflagration on behalf of Israel? Because that's exactly what Netanyahu's goal is. That's always been his goal. But it's even more important now. Why? Well, there's two reasons. Two reasons Netanyahu wants us to go to war with Iran. First of all, if you remember back, Netanyahu has been on the precipice of being removed from power and sent to prison for corruption. In fact, the day that he leaves the safety and immunity of his political office, that's the day that the prison doors are going to start to slide shut around him. Look it up on Google. Look at the pictures out there over the last 2 years, even prior to October 7th. In fact, this is one of the things that I believe led to October 7th, or at least led to him not taking action when he had the intel to know the attack on the 7th was going to take place, but he didn't defend the people. He let it happen. Look up on Google. For the last 2 years, thousands of Israeli citizens, sometimes protests of over 100,000 people at a time, out in the streets demanding that he step down because he is corrupt as hell and they know it. So Netanyahu knows that the only thing that's keeping him in power at this point is war. You don't change horses midstream, right? And that's why, even though Gaza has been utterly demolished multiple times over, hey guys, move from the north down, we're going to attack the north, move to the south, bam, 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 annihilate everything in sight up in the north. Hey guys, now we're going to attack the south, move up north, all right? They destroy everything in the south. Hey guys, in the north, we're going to destroy the north again. Back and forth, back and forth. The infrastructure is gone. The Hamas leadership has been decapitated. Even though there's been opportunity after opportunity for Netanyahu to secure the release of the hostages, he has chosen instead to continue the war. The war cannot end. That's why, after destroying Gaza, and it's starting to look like, what the hell are we doing here? Shouldn't we end this war? Now he has invaded southern Lebanon. We've got a new war going on there. So he has to keep the war going to retain his political office in order to stay out of prison. Like I said, that's just one reason that he's got this war going. The other reason is that he wants a legacy. He wants to be, you can tell it, read it. You can read his stuff. The guy's a megalomaniac. He wants a legacy as the greatest leader in the history of Israel. He wants to be seen as the most powerful figure in Zionist history who achieved the goals of the movement. And he talks about the goals in his book. Netanyahu's goal is the goal of Zionism, which is to eliminate the Palestinian resistance to total Jewish domination in the land. And the only way to accomplish that is to drive out the Palestinians. You cannot have them there. If they're there, they're going to want a state of their own. But you can't fold them into a one state because they would be the majority. And you can no longer have a Jewish supremacist state, which is what it is under their constitution now. It's an apartheid system where Jews have rights as Israeli citizens that Arab Israeli citizens don't have. So the objective of Zionism is not just a homeland for the Jewish people. That sounds nice, doesn't it? We just need a place where we can be free from the olden days of persecution in Europe. Yeah, that's nice, but that's not what Zionism is. The real objective is to consolidate hegemonic power and control over the wider area known as Greater Israel. This is a territory that will eventually encompass all of Palestine, parts of Egypt, parts of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, parts of Iraq. I'm talking about a giant Jewish superstate. That's the goal of Zionism. And who's standing in the way of that goal? It's not Egypt anymore. It's not Iraq anymore. We got rid of them. We paid off Egypt, and we overthrew the government in Iraq. So who's left? It's now Iran. And fortunately for Israel, the Zionist geopolitical goal of toppling Iran syncs up very nicely with the goals of the American neocons, who want to topple Iran to do exactly what the USA has done and continues to do in other nations in the Middle East, like Syria and Iraq, which is to steal their oil for the financial profits of the corporate elites, for the investors and the bankers who turn blood into oil and oil into riches. And that's why I said earlier that Biden isn't just incapable of stopping Netanyahu, he is unwilling to rein in Netanyahu. I don't think Biden wants a war with Iran, at least not until after the election. But all of the deep state operatives around him do. All of the neocons who work in the military-industrial complex do. All of the globalist wonks from the Council on Foreign Relations who control Biden's State Department, they do. There's just too much money to be made from toppling Iran. So if the cost of gaining control over Iranian oil fields happens to be allowing Israel to commit a little genocide here and a little ethnic cleansing there, that's the price these bastards are willing to let others pay. So let's talk more about this. Down in the comments, tell me your thoughts. What do you think? And do you want to see more videos like this? You want me to jump back in and start doing these videos? I'm thinking about it. You're welcome to toss a couple dollars in my tip jar to show me your interest. You can go to patreon.com/blackstoneintel, paypal.me/blackstoneintel, or buymeacoffee.com/blackstoneintel. And I'll end this by just sharing something from page 372 here that Netanyahu wrote. I love it. He says, "The persistent refusal of most of the Jews to see the need for something as obvious as the capacity for self-defense seems incredible today. Of course, after the catastrophe of World War II, many Jews came to understand the need for military power quickly enough. They understood the stark fact that the absence of a Jewish ability to physically resist the Nazis had permitted a third of their people to be slaughtered." Let me read that again. Let me substitute a word. Of course, after the catastrophe of the 1948 Nakba, many Palestinians came to understand the need for military power quickly enough. They understood the stark fact that the absence of a Palestinian ability to physically resist the Jewish Nazis of Israel had permitted a third of their people to be slaughtered in Gaza and the West Bank. I like that version a lot more. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.